There is a war for your attention. There are so many different sources vying for our attention and our focus nowadays that it can be extremely overwhelming when you're trying to move towards a goal or something that's important to you in your life. Essentially, if we're allowing ourselves to be distracted by all these different things, we are disempowering ourselves, and the chances of us ever actually achieving our goals or even gaining clarity around what those goals might be are very, very low. In this episode, I want to share with you some of the things that I have found particularly useful when it comes to rebuilding and regaining that focus and being able to apply it to the things that actually mean something to you. Now, I've read so many books, I've listened to the podcasts, I've had the conversations, and I've gotten very, very frustrated when trying to implement new habits and new techniques that just haven't worked, because I inevitably find myself going back to the distraction, going back to the phone, going back to the social media, and that builds frustration in itself because you know you should be focusing on something else. So what I'm going to share with you today are the ones that I'm doing right now, the ones that I found personally that work. Again, I'm not an expert. There are different techniques that work for different people. There are different things that different people might find useful. However, for me, these are the ones that I keep coming back to. These are the ones that have the most impact in my life, and that's what I want to give across to you today. The underlying principle behind this whole thing is not just to think you have to rely on massive levels of motivation and discipline. Those things are important. Motivation, not so much. There's this whole idea that motivation is a myth. Discipline is important. You want to be able to stick to something. However, this is not a game of brute force. You're not just trying to force your way through this. You're trying to actually build a system that you can stick to in the long term. You're trying to implement lifestyle change here forever. You're trying to become the type of person who is able to apply focus, who is able to achieve that state of deep work and move the needle towards something that you want to achieve. So that's when I'm speaking about the tips and the techniques and the tools today in this episode. That's what you should have in the back of your mind. These are things that should be easy to implement, that should be easy to repeat, and that should empower you and put you in a position where you achieve the things you want to achieve. The main thing with this, and I've done a whole other episode and will probably do more on this concept, the main thing to remember is that planning is absolutely everything. If you cannot plan, if you can't gain some clarity around what it is you're trying to achieve, then achieving it is going to be next to impossible. Then the things that distract you normally are going to become even more tempting because you're frustrated, because you're a little bit aimless, because you don't know exactly what direction you're heading in. So understanding how to plan your week, how to plan your day, how to plan your hour, and then being able to action on that is massive. I actually recorded a whole episode on this before with Brian O'Loughlin, where he explained his calendar system, his calendar training, and how he sets his week up and his days up for success. And to be honest with you, it's one of the big things that I have found in my life that helped me with my organization and my structure. When I started my business was the first time I really got a kick in the teeth and realized that if I didn't have some sort of structure around this, I could come in here and aimlessly float through the day, being busy, work 12, 13, 14 hours and still not achieve any forward momentum. And that was massively frustrating for me. So that episode and that conversation with Brian kind of illustrates the first step in me starting to organize my day, organize my week, and have some way to plan and reflect on that. So I would definitely recommend listening to that. So step one, make sure you understand how to plan what it is you're trying to achieve and how you're going to do it. Next, and this will lead into a variety of the points I'm going to make today, is understanding triggers. Now, you've probably heard the word trigger before in an emotional sense when it comes to trauma, when it comes to your emotions, when it comes to dealing with other people. But triggers in terms of distraction and focus are so important because essentially anything that distracts you from doing the work that you're doing has been triggered by something. It could be an emotional state. It could be your physical environment. It could be something in the room like your phone or a notification or a sound or a noise. All of these things are triggers, and those triggers will lead you down ingrained pathways of behaviors that you've done before. So understanding those triggers, first of all, understanding that you can be triggered, because all of us have those inherent triggers that we're either aware of or unaware of, and trying to make more of those, trying to bring more of those into your consciousness is really, really important. That quote by Carl Jung comes up all the time. Unless you can make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life and you will call it fate. If you don't even acknowledge or understand that you have triggers in there, you will constantly find yourself being pulled out of the moment, being pulled out of the work, being pulled out of the connection, And you will think that that's just who you are and this is just what's happening. But generating an awareness around those triggers, what they are and how to manage them is massively powerful. And I'll talk about some of those triggers going forward. But that concept of understanding that there are triggers is huge. That leads us to the environment, the room that you're in, the place you're doing the work or doing the thing that it is that you're doing. If you can optimize that, if you can minimize the triggers, minimize the things that are potentially going to distract you. For example, if you have the TV on in the background with Netflix, that is an obvious trigger that's going to distract you away from trying to do your work, from trying to complete that project, from trying to have that conversation. That is an obvious trigger in the environment. So turn the TV off, work in the room without the TV. Music is another one. For me personally, anyone who comes into the studio here knows that I have lo-fi on in the background because there's a beat to it, but there's no lyrics and it's not distracting for me. Any other sort of music, radio, background noise is hugely distracting for me personally, and it immediately pulls me out and constantly pulls me out of what I'm trying to do. So understanding the environment, make sure it's comfortable, make sure the temperature is set right. Environment also has to do with your own physical state. Are you hungry? Are you cold? Are you comfortable? All of these different things can be optimized and will help you to maintain focus on what it is that you're trying to do. So understanding your environment is absolutely massive. For me, a big trigger and a big issue and a big environmental factor is my phone. And probably for most of you listening, the phone is one of the, if not the biggest issue out here, because the phone is where it houses your email, it houses your social media, it houses YouTube, it houses Netflix, all of those potential distractions and all of those pulls out of your deep focus world live on your phone. Well, they do for me anyway. So the phone is a massive, massive issue. I have often found myself quickly checking an email or checking a WhatsApp from somebody on my phone in the middle of a project and 25 minutes later pulling my head out of my phone. And there is a massive cost there. There is a switchover cost from going from the task to your phone and back to the task. And also, you've just lost 25 minutes down some random stream of social media or WhatsApp messages that you probably can't even remember. So it's a compounding effect, a compounding negative effect if you allow yourself to get lost down the phone. Understanding the triggers around the phone are also very, very important. So even just having your phone on the desk beside you is a potential trigger. It's a visual trigger because your body wants to reach for the phone. Your brain knows there's a source of dopamine in there. There's a source of distraction in there. There's a source of escape in there. So automatically my hand will snake out to grab my phone when I see it, when it's on the desk beside me. You probably are intimately familiar with the color of the notification lights on your phones, that the exact frequency of the vibration of your phone, the tones, the noise your phone makes for different notifications. It's built into you, and each one of those is a separate trigger that signifies to your brain that there's an escape, there's dopamine. You don't have to do this hard work. So the phone is a huge issue. And for me, the simplest way to manage this is just don't have it in the same room, or don't have it within your view or within hand's reach. For me personally, I leave it on the opposite side of the room, on silent, face down, and I just accept that if there's an emergency, I'll get to it within the next 25 or 30 minutes when I'm taking a break from one of my work sprints. It doesn't have to be on all the time. Some people might need to be accessible by their phone, and that's fine. But even so, you can set your phone up in a way that only allows certain calls through. You can filter this. The technology is there, and we are able to do it. We just don't. A second little hint with your phone is to use grayscale mode during the day. Grayscale mode essentially removes all of the color from your phone. And again, that visual trigger for things like Instagram and YouTube, which are inherently visual apps, lose a huge amount of their appeal when you put your phone in grayscale mode. So if you do happen to pick your phone up, you are less likely to get caught down a rabbit hole of scrolling because it's less visually appealing. But personally, I find the most effective way to manage the phone is to leave it on the other side of the room on silent, so there are no triggers there for me to pick it up. You will feel some resistance to this, and I personally could be sitting there working away and the hand just snakes out when the phone's not there. I realise obviously that's a massive issue for me, and I'm glad I left it on the other side of the room. But whatever works for you, I would highly recommend going a little bit more extreme with this one and just not having it available to you, because again, we don't want to have to rely on discipline here. We want to be able to build and optimize our environment to allow us to achieve the goals. The next massive strategy, which you might have heard me mention there, is to work in sprints. Now, I spoke about the Pomodoro method before, and this is probably my favorite method, which essentially involves working in dedicated blocks with small breaks in between to allow you to focus solely on a specific task during that time frame. So the Pomodoro technique would typically be 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. There are loads of different ways you can do this. Ideally, don't use your phone as your timer. You can buy a small, separate little egg timer or kitchen timer. There are apps online online, just Google Pomodoro timer online if you're working on your computer. There are many, many different ways to time this that don't rely on your phone. So I would recommend not to use your phone for the Pomodoro timer, but essentially what this allows you to do is spend a short, condensed and focused period of time working on one specific thing, followed by a quick break where you can get up, you can break that monotonous sitting position, you can do a few push-ups, walk around, do some breath work, get a cup of tea, and immediately get back into another block of focused work. For me, this has absolutely revolutionized how productive I am compared to sitting down with a task on a piece of paper and an open-ended amount of time. Parkinson's law, which I've spoken about before, means that we will fill any amount of time with the specific amount of work given. So if you give yourself 4 hours to do a task, it will take you 4 hours. If you give yourself 2 blocks of 25 minutes, the chances are you will get the vast majority of it done. Working under that type of time pressure and those constraints really helps us to focus down, and it is astounding what your brain is capable of when you just give it some barriers and some limitations and ask it to focus right in. Open-ended work timeframes do not work for the vast majority of people. You might be different, but I highly, highly doubt it. So check out the Pomodoro technique or some form of blocked work sprints, and you will be amazed at how much more productive and how much more work you get done. And again, it's not about toxic positivity and hustle culture and squeezing more into the day. It is about identifying something that's important to you and making sure that every ounce of your focus is placed on that task while you're not being distracted by other things. This might not be popular to say, but multitasking is not a thing. You are not capable of multitasking when it comes to this type of work. There's this whole concept of parallel processing, which our brains are not designed to do, doing multiple things at the same time. If you're focused on something, it means you cannot be focused on something else. The example I've seen used is people say, well, sure, I can drive and talk at the same time, but you're not focusing on driving. Driving is an ingrained behavior. Driving is happening almost automatically in the background through muscle memory and neural pathways that you developed. If you're specifically focusing on a task that requires your attention and requires your dedicated focus, it is not possible to focus on something else. So if you have multiple things going on in the room at the same time, if you're trying to maintain a conversation, if you're checking your WhatsApp messages while you're trying to write an email, while you're trying to finish that project, everything will suffer. The quality of everything will suffer. So it is within your interest to build a system like the Pomodoro technique where you can specifically focus on something for a short period of time and then move on to the next task rather than trying to do them in parallel. To round up all of these tips I've shared so far would be practice. Practicing this focus is absolutely vital. Like any other skill, you are going to need to unlearn some bad behaviors and learn some new good behaviors. You're going to need to develop some new neural pathways. I recently heard Dr. K, owner of a company called Healthy Gamer, speak about this concept of boredom, training boredom, being comfortable with boredom. He explains an exercise where people sit and stare at a wall for an hour, which sounds like absolute hell to me. And it only sounds like hell to me because my brain is so used to being overstimulated that the idea of not being stimulated for anything more than 5 minutes is terrifying because there's huge resistance there for me. But that's how I know it is an issue. This idea of sitting and staring at a wall, becoming comfortable with boredom, not requiring constant stimulation, understanding how your brain works and understanding how your thoughts are processed. I spoke about this before as well in terms of meditation, journaling, walking, not constantly feeding information in, but allowing information to be processed and move out. You become better and better at processing information, better and better at calming your mind, better and better at maintaining your focus. And this means you are so less likely to need to reach out for a constant hit of dopamine or constant stimulus when you feel uncomfortable with the purely blinkered focus on a specific task. You are so much less likely to try and distract yourself with anything else, like getting up to go for a cup of tea, going on your phone, aimlessly wandering around, looking for a chat and looking for a distraction, if you are better at being bored, quote unquote. Now, technically, you shouldn't be bored if you're doing your project. You should be focused on the work, but the concept is the same. Your brain becomes more comfortable not receiving constant input, and that allows you to be more creative, and it allows you to express your thoughts, express your creativity, and focus more on the task at hand. So this idea of practice is so important. Like I said before, I've read all the books, I've listened to the podcast, I've had the conversations. However, being able to get consistent with the techniques and being able to practice these things is the most difficult part of this whole thing. This whole idea of actioning on these specific techniques and tools consistently over and over and over again is what's going to lead you to success. So rounding up all those tips and tools I shared there, practicing is the most important and the most difficult part of this entire thing is what I found personally. However, on the journey I'm on now, I have found that I have slowly and incrementally gotten better and better and better at this, to the point where now I can look back in a week and I can identify specifically the periods of time where I know I was focused and the periods of time where I know I got distracted. When I know I got distracted, I try and do the exact same exercise I just explained earlier on. I try and understand what the triggers are for that distraction. Was I tired? Was I hungry? What was going on? Was I overwhelmed? Had I not planned my week properly? Was I not using my work sprints? Did I allow my phone on the table? All of these things tend to creep back in, but now that I'm aware of them, I'm able to identify them and try and remove them again. And this is an ongoing process. As I mentioned at the very start, this is a lifestyle change and this is something you want to adapt to forever. So you cannot rely on motivation. There will be dips, there'll be weeks where you don't get anything done. But the most important thing when that happens, because it will happen, is not to abandon everything, not to pull the whole thing down on top of your head because you had a bad day or a bad week. Just return to the system, return to the strategy, do your planning and action. And that is the most effective thing that I personally have found to be able to maintain this for the long term. To round this up on a positive note, the really, really nice thing that I found with this is when you do achieve even that first 25-minute block of deep focused work, when you see the results of being able to hone your attention in on one specific thing that you've decided is important. Remember, this is all about what you want. It's not about productivity. It's not about getting more done. It's about getting the things done that you believe are important. When you get that first block of deep work done and you look at the work you've achieved in a short period of time with intense focus and you've managed to avoid distraction, that feeling of satisfaction is absolutely brilliant. And that becomes addictive in its own right. Becoming addicted to being good at focusing on and achieving the things that you want to achieve is an empowering feeling. And as we all know, that's what I do this podcast for. I want to understand more ways to empower myself and hopefully empower you as listeners to live more fulfilled and purposeful lives. So if you can take one takeaway from this, is that there are resistances and frustrations and difficulties with this focus thing. There are many, many, many different elements out there battling for your attention. However, if you are able to reclaim even a small portion of that attention and apply it to something that you know means something in your life, you are empowering yourself and you are taking back control. And that, my friends, is what this is all about.